Hey everyone, we're back with Dragon Age Veilguard, the gift that keeps on giving. And of course, this is all thanks to something recently written by Jason Schreier. Uh, I saw this pop up on my YouTube feed as various streamers, as various content creators were reacting to the deep dive that Jason Schreier provided on Veilguard. And let me just say, it wasn't as deep as I would like. Let's all be real here. Now, I just want to preface this all with a reminder for anyone who's returning to my content or to anyone who is new to my content. I am not one of those original players who are, always talking about the good old days in Dragon Age Origins, because I never really completed or got through Dragon Age Origins, which is something else that I could talk about on another day, why I haven't been dragged into playing Dragon Age Origins. I've played probably, I would say, like a couple hours in, and that was about it. However, it might interest some of you to know that Dragon Age 2 was one of the very first video games proper that I completed on the Xbox 360 around, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. Essentially, I was never a massive gamer. And so when it came time to, trying out this new console that I got, uh, one of the words that kind of drew my eye right away was the word dragon. And so I started playing Dragon Age 2, which is probably one of the weaker entries of that franchise. But I actually got really hooked into the story, and I didn't understand or know that the game was bad. I just was, I guess, having fun to a certain degree. And when Dragon Age Inquisition came out, it was just a matter of course for us to play that as well. It was yet another game that I actually completed to the end. So when I say that I have a love for Dragon Age, I need to be very clear that my enjoyment of the franchise is incredibly subjective. It's a very personal experience, and it was largely determined by the complexity and the compelling nature of the narrative that I discovered there. However, that does not mean that these Dragon Ages that I enjoyed are necessarily great games, but they were very fun for me to play. So when I say that I have issues with how Jason Schreier talks about Veilguard, I'm not coming at it as a particular group. I'm not speaking for a particular group that is very, very much disappointed in where the franchise has gone. But I am still disappointed with where the franchise has gone, because even from the direction that I began at, Veilguard just goes right off the rails. So if you start with Origins, you feel like the franchise has completely gone somewhere else to a whole other universe. Even I, with my love for DA2 and Dragon Age Inquisition, also feels like what I've seen, what I've watched of Veilguard, what I have watched others experience of Veilguard, tells me that this game is no longer within the purview of the games that I enjoyed. And so my issue with Jason Schreier's Postmortem, so to speak, is that he didn't spill the tea. He didn't actually deep dive. He just gave us excuses. He hand-waved away legitimate criticism, both about what people were criticizing the game, and also hand-waved away how widespread that criticism was, how widespread our concerns about the narrative and the writing was. And instead, he just focused on corporate issues and pointed the finger kind of upward. And don't get me wrong, I understand how corporate can F over a studio. Like, during my ghostwriting days, I found out the hard way how lack of vision or trend chasing from a client can derail a creative project, right? So if you have a client or if you have a boss who doesn't know what they want, who's just chasing trends, it can really hamper you. That's a legitimate criticism, a legitimate, issue or problem in the workplace that needs to be dealt with. However, the writing of Veilguard was really bad, which can't have been entirely corporate's fault. Just because they asked for a live service game doesn't mean that the writing had to be shitty. It didn't mean that the lore had to go down the tubes, right? It didn't mean that we had to put preachy messaging in. So in this case, I feel like Schreier's journalism is a little sketchy because we don't have a definitive point where we learned that corporate specifically requested a quippy MCU knockoff live service game complete with misrepresentation of lore and woke virtue signaling tacked on. Like, at no point in time did I really feel like he was saying, yep, that's what corporate really wanted. It's just, at this point, it just feels like he said, she said. And I'm just like, is this all we got? And so it has me, once again, thinking about this eternal question. When is writing bad? When is writing woke? And when is it both? So we'll come back to this question, but let's go on a journey, and we're going to start with Asmongold. And so here's Asmongold talking a little bit about his initial takes on the whole situation.
So he's writing this whole article explaining why Dragon Age was bad and everything. And I wanted to go back and see exactly where it came down to, what is actually people's response to the game. And this is a big issue. And so let's scroll down. We're going to find and see if there's any level of instance of this where he talks about why the game wasn't liked. When Dragon Age the Veilguard, this is the important part. When Dragon Age the Veilguard finally premiered on Halloween 2024 after many internal delays, some staff members thought there was a lot to like, including the game's new combat system, but players were less impressed and sales sputtered. The reactions of the fan base are mixed, to put it gently. No, they were not mixed. It was actually very one-dimensional. Some, like myself, adore it for various reasons. Others feel utterly betrayed for certain design choices. And so this is the big issue that Jason has, is that Jason Schreier does not even want... This is... Like, I think Jason... Like, it's embarrassing because I think Jason is he's a journalist... And he's just pushing propaganda. Like, if you actually think that the reason why Dragon Age failed didn't have anything to do with that, like, type of woke and, like, fucking social messaging, you're out of your fucking mind.
Okay, so here we can see that Asmon has drawn a correlation that many other people have basically also drawn, right? Everyone has come to the conclusion that Veilguard did the thing, right? It went woke and it went broke, basically. And I know it's very easy to kind of hand wave away Asmon's criticism as just another right-wing grift. But even SkillUp, who is considered to be the fence sitter of all time, if not, a progressive himself, had a lot of questions. So let's take a look at what SkillUp said.
No pressure from EA to cram in all sorts of live service bullshit like it was meant to have at one point, but they pivoted away from that years ago. There's no in-game cash shop here, there was obviously plenty of development time and budget, there was the freedom for BioWare to make a BioWare-ass BioWare game, without any compromises, and without any excuses. In no way, shape or form did BioWare meet the moment and capitalize on the opportunity that was handed to them. Dragon Age the Veilguard apes the most superficial elements of a BioWare game, making no effort to modernize what is a now fairly dated formula, while delivering absolutely none of the writing, characterization and imagination that made its previous games so great. The writing is frankly terminal. It lacks any nuance or wit or wisdom. It cannot communicate ideas except to say them aloud to the camera. It manufactures petty, unbelievable tension because it doesn't know how to create anything more real, and it's too scared to ever be truly confronting or dark for fear that it might make the audience uncomfortable. Every interaction between the companions feels like HR is in the room, and every interaction led by the main character, Rook, sounds like he's addressing an under-12 soccer team before a semi-final, or teaching toddlers how to properly share toys.
So if Skill Up is saying that things in this game are so correct, so plastic wrapped, so careful, so socially cautious that it feels like HR was in the room, we got a problem. We got a problem. And so this is just an issue that I feel that Jason Schreier hasn't really tackled. The reality is that Veilguard isn't bad just because it's woke, but also because it's poorly written. And we could say that there's a Venn diagram of high quality stuff being written, and then we could compare that, say, to whatever is woke. And there is this slim margin where something is both woke and well written. I would suggest that one example is the Sandman TV show on Netflix, which I love, and I think it's very well done. What is kind of hilarious and also annoying is that lefties want to believe that the good quality circle and the woke messaging circle are one and the same, because quality for them appears to be determined by the intention of the author or the messaging alone, which is wild. Okay, that is wild considering the Pomo horse that they rode in on, right? So riding in on postmodern, critical theory, they are now telling us we just need to accept this piece of writing because this socially correct author wrote it, because this protected minority wrote it. It's wild. It's wild. Well, we have already talked about this a lot on my channel on our streams, where we reacted to Greg Owen's video on Hollywood wokeness and where it came from. This is really the final form of cultural Marxism melding with a handful of other theoretical ideas, usually popular in the literary circles, like intersectional, critical theory, critical race theory, blah, 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 blah. And once again, you might be new to this channel, so you might not know, but I have a degree in literature and culture studies. I sat front row for this insanity, okay? And I can tell you, all right, not all people who are writing bad stuff are woke, but there does seem to be this weird intersection of a specific form of bad writing that is linked to being kind of woke or hyper progressive, to the point where you're virtue signaling your progressiveness all the time. And I just want to remind everyone that, based off of this supposition that I have, that not all writing has to be woke, in order to be bad, I will say that there are lots of right-wing people who instantly think that something is going to be poor quality because it's progressive. And this is patently untrue. I mean, just because your product is right-wing doesn't make it good either, right? And I had a client who was kind of based, and he requested for very specific non-progressive themes in his work. I can't say any more because of NDA, but suffice to say that it seemed like something that would be really interesting to write for this client. That client ended up not knowing what he was doing at all. And when it came time to revising my work, the things that client requested showed such a lack of literary quality. And it just proved to me all over again that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, you can be a shitty writer and have shitty ideas about writing. So I don't want to get on some weird bandwagon where it says, oh, because you're progressive, you can't write well. That's not true. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a case in point where you can have very progressive ideals and concepts and still have fairly great writing overall. So one thing I will say, having said all of that, is that regardless of the point of the writing, if the messaging or correctness of ethics or morality for a particular group take precedence, there's a higher chance for the writing to be compromised. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about, those types of like Christian writers or religious writers, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or whatever, or whether you are focused on a specific political party, whether you're communist or, socialist, Marxist, or whatever it is that you might want to call yourself. If your ideas and your beliefs take so much precedence, it will affect your writing, okay? Your characters will be protected. The ones that you want to make a point with are going to be overly protected as you plan and plot and write your novel. Your plot is going to be contrived. Choices will disappear. Complexity will be gone completely because everything will be one note. It will be just a hug box, an echo chamber, lore-breaking nonsense because you're not going to want to take a risk and actually take your characters to a place that you might not agree with, right? You might be so concerned about proving that capitalism is bad, Lord forbid some side characters on the side actually find happiness within a capitalist framework because it works for them. But like, Lord forbid that happens. So you're going to have to write it somehow so that, those people are not going to like it. In this situation, we can see that a lot of people have come forward, whether they are, straight or queer or from any part of the spectrum, whatever their political background is. People of all kinds of backgrounds have come forward to say, hey, we were disappointed by Veilguard. And this is where the role of reviewers really comes to the fore. So let's take a look at what Asmon says about his role pertaining to Veilguard.
And so the reality is that a lot of people, despite all the BioWare higher-ups that he talked to, he intentionally missed the story. The game failed because it was defined in the minds of the audience by YouTubers making fun of the quests and the pronouns. This is the game that proved that approval from Asmongold matters more than approval for IGN. I don't even think it's about me, right? Like, I'm not even talking about me. Like, there's a lot of people that make, because this is the reality. Why the people pushing this? No, these people want to ignore the elephant in the room. They ignore the elephant in the room. They say it's not there. It's not there. So Paul Tassi goes back, he tweets about this. He says, it's easy to push back on this, but when, quote, woke debates consume literally the entire marketing campaign, that it can, in fact, be damaging. It is. Like, if you think that it's not bad when you have a trailer come out and most people think that it's garbage and it has a negative like-dislike ratio or an under 50% like-dislike ratio, you have a fucking problem. You have a major fucking problem. And I said, well, I'm sure making videos is a rallying point. The reality is most people consume content that reinforces what they already believe. There are people who adamantly defend woke games, but nobody watches them because those ideas and viewpoints are inherently unpopular. And so he responded, I actually didn't even see this. This is the first time I'm reading this. The term influencer exists for a reason. The people like you or Rogan or whoever shape the views on topics and not just act like a mirror. On top of that, negative content will get 10x the attention as positive, which applies to the whole anti-woke industry and why it's so successful. That's not even really true. Now, the reason why this isn't true is that, like, I can come up with some examples. Like, let me come up with 3 examples right now. Let's look at Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, and Expedition 33, okay? These are 3 really big popular games that came out recently. And every single video that was negative about those games was not popular at all, and people were inherently negative and they hated those videos and nobody cared. But all the videos glazing it, like, well, let me see here, Expedition 33 best game. Like, if I just search this up, like, you got 2 million fucking views on this, and this is Game Ranks. People are massively fucking positive about this. People are talking about, we didn't talk about this. Everybody is positive about this fucking game. And so really, people do not consume content that is negative or positive. Maybe negativity bias exists to an extent, but a 10x is absolutely not the multiplier. The reality here is that people consume content that reinforces their existing biases. So if there's a game that comes out and everybody thinks it's good, then you make content about the game being good, and you're going to have everybody loving the content. If there's a game that comes out and it's bad, you make content about the game being bad, you make a video saying it's bad, everybody's going to love the content. The reality is that people consume content based off of what is appealing to them and what they already believe. That's the truth. And like, you can see this, and like, again, I just gave 3 examples. Like, look at all the videos glazing Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, and Expedition 33. Compare that to the videos that are negative about those games. Is that a 10x ratio? Do the videos that are negative have 10 times the views? Absolutely they don't, because this idea is not true. And the fact is that people like, and it's easy to say that, right? It's easy to say what he's saying, but it's just simply not represented in data. That's it. It's just not. And did you not bash the wokeness of Avowed and it died? If it's bad, it's bad. Yeah, I think so. But like, for example, like, you can look at South of Midnight. Like, I thought that game was pretty decent. It was all right. And it didn't matter because people had already decided that they didn't like the game.
Okay, so as you can see here, Asmon is fairly, well, I was going to say based, but he's fairly down to earth and humble here, because he points out the very real fact that reviewers do have limited influence. They simply reflect interest. So when Asmon gets more clicks, it's because he's confirming what already existed. He's confirming people's bias, what people expect. And the more clicks he gets means that more people are thinking, oh, this guy is onto something. Oh, true and real. He knows it. I know it. Everybody knows it, right? To quote Asmon. So whether you like Asmon or not, you have to admit that he represents, by virtue of the size of his audience, a silenced group of people who do have some spending power. And it is voices like Asmon and other YouTubers who have enough of a kind of cultural impact that they are recognized by the creatives in question. And they are there to keep the creatives honest, to basically make sure that the creatives understand, hey, there is a group of people over here that I happen to be, accidentally or purposefully representing. And we're not happy with the product, and here is why. And it's really crucial that this sort of relationship does exist, because at the end of the day, this is all about time and money, right? These creatives aren't just making things because they love to make things. They're also making things with the goal in mind to make some money, to have a paycheck, to put food on the table. And if they are going to get my money that I worked hard for, they're going to have to earn it. They can't just get it for free for doing nothing. And this is where we can vote with our wallets. This is why we have a lot of power to just say no, and to essentially and unfortunately have to cause these companies to go bankrupt or to just close down. And it's not something that most of us want per se, but it's going to be the natural outcome of people basically fucking around and finding out. If they don't listen to what we want, and if they don't give us what we want, or even if they don't, predict what we want before we even know that we want it, guess what? They're not going to get money from us. And so Asmon and all of the other YouTubers represent these voices that let these people know ahead of time, hey, you're not giving us what we want. And for Schreier and other journalists to come in and pretend that this is somehow some dangerous force in society is ridiculous, okay? In the publishing industry, in the publishing world, in the writing world, reviews matter. Because if people don't like your books, they're not going to buy them. You are not entitled to people's money. So, yeah. Now, Asmon points out Schreier's first tweets and links it to the result. Let's take a look.
He did. Let me see here. Jason. Forbes. Dragon Age. I think I can probably fix this, right? Yeah. Jason Schreier, Dragon Age tweet. So this is what Jason Schreier said initially. He said, go woke or go top the charts, right? There's no way you genuinely like this turd. I actually don't like the game very much, but I like seeing you chuds get dunked on. So Jason Schreier went and he actually tried to defend this game and try to make all the people that didn't like it look bad and look stupid. But it turns out that it doesn't matter because people didn't buy the game, and now he has to write an entire postmortem on why this game not only killed the franchise, but killed basically the entire studio.
So yeah, at the end of the day, people voted with their wallets and showed Jason Schreier exactly how they felt about Veilguard. And no matter what Schreier would like to believe about, there was 50,000 people playing on, the first few days, that's nothing compared to what your average, audience draw might be for even something like, let's say, Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3 or more recently, Expedition 33. There are lots and lots of RPGs out there that people have enjoyed and returned to over and over and over again. And Veilguard is not one of those. And so I think BioWare has now learned exactly what they can lose if they don't give the audience what they want, if they decide to pursue their own aesthetics. Now, I do have some observations to make, though, as a ghostwriter, well, ex-ghostwriter, I should say, since I've recently left that career. But as an ex-ghostwriter and as a creative myself, a woman attempting to launch her own writing brand, I have to say that I was a little let down by the air quote journalism that Schreier shared because it didn't feel like he went deep enough. Like, okay, sure, corporate was doing a switcheroo on the dev team. Okay. And let's say they may have felt like they didn't have a lot of time to turn the ship around. But what else was going on behind the closed doors of the different teams and the leadership changes that happened? Check this out. Early testers and Mass Effect leads complained about the game's snarky tone, a style of video game storytelling once ascendant that was quickly falling out of fashion in pulp culture, but had been part of Goldman's vision for the multiplayer game. Worried that Dragon Age could face the same outcome as Forspoken, a recent title that had been hammered over its impertinent banter, BioWare leaders ordered a belated rewrite of the game's dialogue to make it sound more serious. In the end, the resulting tonal inconsistencies would only add to the game's poor reception with fans. So as you can see here, we have leadership wanting to pursue this snarky, quippy writing, which used to be popular, probably popularized by Joss Whedon and the MCU. It's also been really poorly done. Like, Forspoken's banter was cringe. It was really, really cringe. And nobody thought it was cool. And honestly, there's such a thing as like over egging the pudding. If it's all the time and you're just getting a stream of consciousness of like someone running their mouth all the time, no one likes it. No one likes it. Everyone likes a good quip. No one likes it when it's perpetually coming from the mouth of a woman who is entitled and has been behaving very poorly and is wild and inconsistent and is just poorly depicted. So I think people are fine with snarkiness and dark humor and quips, but when it's poorly written or when it's coming from the mouth of somebody who's, very unlikable, I think it just becomes really, really terrible. And and we got to notice here that the Mass Effect leads. Okay, so the people at Mass Effect looked at this and were instantly able to tell that this was all not good. Okay, all not good. So you might be going, aha, but there's this person called Goldman who made the game this way. Well, I hate to say this, but It seems that Matthew Goldman was the creative director for this project from 2017 to 2021. So between those years, he definitely impacted the writing and the feel of this project, but it had been more or less, I guess, in some sort of pre-development stage, or it had been developed previously before in 2015 by someone else, I think, Mike Laidlaw, who left because he was like, nope, I'm out. These changes are wildin', okay? And then replaced by this bro who transformed it into this quippy writing, which may be the reason why the quippy writing is so bad and ham-fisted, is because the writers that remained weren't used to writing this kind of quippy stuff. But either way, we have this guy come in, Matthew Goldman. He's jamming in this quippiness, this, you know, ooh, like so funny, so modern. But then it seems like there was yet another changeover of plans, I guess. I guess there was some shift yet again in 2021, and the creative director role was taken over by someone called John Epler. So from 2021 to 2024, they had 3 years. 3 years to get the writing together. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe it's because of my background with writing. I just don't understand how you can't sit down and hammer out a story within a month. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I'm sorry. So you can come to me and tell me like, oh, there's other things happening behind the scenes and people were rewriting and nobody could really figure out what the vision was. There are lots of things that can cause a writer to be derailed. Absolutely. I've experienced that personally. But you can still turn a story around within 3 years. Like, can't you just change the quippiness, cut out the amount of quips? So it's very interesting that the Mass Effect team who came in 2023, which would be 1 year or so before the release in 2024, they came in right away, saw the quippiness, and were like, nah, that's cringe. That's cringe. They knew it was cringe. There was feedback that it was cringe. So I don't know how it is, but the writers were okay with it long after Goldman left. And they left it in there. They did not change that writing. So we can point fingers all we want at Goldman and go, ooh, he put it in there. But like the writers continued on. They perpetuated it. Now, there might be reasons why they did. Maybe they weren't allowed to change it. I don't know. This is where I'm saying, like, I have questions, and Jason Schreier did not answer those questions. It only left me with more questions. And I wish that he could have found a way to find a source within the company that maybe was kind of looking at it from the sidelines, maybe from a completely different department, with less maybe like personal attachment to the situation, who would be able to kind of do a more thorough read on the situation. Because at this point in time, like, yeah, sure, we have people coming and going. Yeah, sure, we have EA asking for really stupid shit. But at the same point in time, there is this period where they could have started doing their own thing, and they did not. They kept the quippy, ham-fisted, preachy messaging in. So, yeah, that part, I don't get it. Yeah, that's just weird. And I can't help but think about Yoshi P in what is called today Creative Studio 3, otherwise known as CBU 3 in the past. Yoshi P was able to perform an entire MMO within like 2 years, I think. So an MMO is a massive undertaking, and yet this group of devs were able to somehow turn it around and fix it and revamp it to such a degree that Final Fantasy XIV is probably in the top 5 MMO contenders for, this time period. So I definitely think there should be a closer look at how things were happening on the micromanagement level, because something went wrong somewhere, and it wasn't just corporate faffing around. And if we take a look at Schreier's notes, I think there's a little bit of a clue. A little bit of a clue as to what was going on. So let's take a little look here. All right. And we're going to take a look at a situation where they realized they needed help. So Schreier wrote, in 2023, to help finish Dragon Age, BioWare brought in a second internal team, which was working on the next Mass Effect game. For decades, there'd been tension between the two well-established camps, known for their starkly divergent ways of doing things. BioWare developers like to joke that the Dragon Age crew was like a pirate ship, meandering and sometimes traveling off course, but eventually reaching the port. In contrast, the Mass Effect group was called the USS Enterprise, after the Star Trek ship, because commands were issued straight down from the top and executed zealously. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've been effed around by corporate and you are suddenly finding yourself in a major time crunch, one has to wonder, which group do you think is going to do well? The one that has a history of executing orders instantaneously within a well-managed group, or the one that has been allowed to develop a habit of meandering around? What do you think? I'm looking at this and I'm thinking there was some kind of work culture that, long-term shafted Dragon Age. And I will say that I've heard rumblings from certain friends of mine who work in the industry, how some companies have gotten too bloated, how some companies have gotten too bureaucratic, and it slows down innovation and communication between certain divisions. Some people are returning to more like small nuclei of groups of different skilled workers working together. So, for example, having a programmer with an artist, with a writer, with a designers, with et cetera, all together in one small group working on a single piece of content at a time, appears to be better than having all of the artists in one section doing their thing, separate from all of the programmers and level designers doing their thing, separate from all of the writers doing their thing. So it seems like there are worse and better ways to manage your teams. Probably depends on the project. I don't know. But what is very clear to me is from this little hint here, just this little hint here, we can guess that whatever went on, someone, somewhere wasn't organized enough. And they had to pull in this other team, which was known for its hyper-organization. Now, you can guess how this is going to go, all right? So, next up, Jason Schreier says, as the Mass Effect directors took control, they scoffed that the Dragon Age squad had been doing a shoddy job and began excluding their leaders from pivotal meetings, according to people familiar with the internal friction. Over time, the Mass Effect went on to da-da-da-da-da. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But it says, even changes that appeared to improve the game stoked the simmering rancor inside BioWare, infuriating Dragon Age leaders who've been told they didn't have the budget for such big, ambitious swings. So this is so fascinating to me. It's kind of like watching a little train wreck kind of like going right off a cliff in flames. I guess it's because it reminds me of the importance of having everybody on board and also having a solid kind of team, and also the importance I can only imagine. But the importance as well of kind of being all on the same wavelength together. When I was ghostwriting, I could go off and do my writing part on my own, but on occasion I had to work, let's say during the outlining phase, with a substantive editor. And after I finished writing, I would have a line or copy editor come in and do the second stage of editing. And essentially, if that editor had a chip on their shoulder, if that editor had personal hidden ambitions to be a writer, if that editor had an agenda, if that editor was tired or busy or stressed out from life, things were going to go sideways. Things were going to go sideways. And then suddenly the client would have to come to me and be like, what's going on here? On the other hand, if the client was just driving the editor crazy, I would have to step in sometimes and advocate for the editor. If you don't have everyone on board, and if there is any sense of one-upmanship going on, things are going to get bad. Things are going to get bad. So I wouldn't be surprised if a large portion of Veilguard's writing is simply due to human incompetence. I mean, that's like the answer to most of Occam Razor type situations, right? But I also do wonder if perhaps Dragon Age's piratical, more meandering approach to getting the work done really shot them in the foot when they were yanked around by corporate. And that's just unfortunate. So the problems that leapt to my eye just from reading these kinds of sections of his reporting is that, yes, there were management decisions, right, that were poorly dealt with. You had people who were told to do something, they didn't agree with it, and it probably really affected their work. And also, there was a lack of vision. So I bet there was probably a lot of rewriting and waffling around about what is going to happen, what are we going to do. Just the fact that it was initially teased as Dreadwolf and then more or less ended up about Elganon and Gillenane. Have you heard of the Elder Gods, Elganon and Gillenane? So that tells me that, like, obviously somewhere the vision went all places. And that probably wasted a lot of the writers' times. Not gonna lie, I feel for them. Number 3, trend chasing. So you have these corporate people saying, oh, I want you to get out there and make this live service game. But that to me is still not a good enough excuse, because you could do something gritty and meaningful and complex. It also tells me, just by the fact that the story is what it is, that they're also kind of trend chasing current, politics and ideas about modern living. And that to me is, it's virtue signaling basically. And I don't like that either. I don't like to see that in writing either. And we can see that the different team environments did not mesh well with each other. They had different work processes, different approaches. And I do think ultimately, I think Mass Effect's team probably bounced back better with all of these changes and stepping in to help better than Dragon Age team themselves. And it's really just about what kind of work environment that you encourage and you build at that place. And perhaps there's 2 extremes, right? There's the micromanagement that we see in Asia, which can result in lack of creativity and, just stress. We talk a lot about crunch culture, but maybe we should also talk about, I don't know what to call it, slack culture, poorly managed culture, where people may not be utilized to their fullest extent because either management doesn't know what they're doing, or people are digging their heels in, or people are lazy, or there's not enough oversight. I don't know what it is. I would love to be a fly on the wall to figure it out. But it does feel like in the West, we have a different kind of a problem. Let's just say that. All of these issues, right? all of these issues could have hit Veilguard really badly. And I understand that it resulted in people probably rushing at the last minute and shitting something out. But you could shit out something that's really gritty and meaningful and sort of complex, right? Sort of, like, at least like have some, iffy situation going on where you're like, oh, should that have happened? Should we be cheering this? Are we the bad guys? Like, there's still something about the writing that is really off. And so let's take a look at what Schreier says about probably what is considered to be the best part and the most meaningful in terms of choices in the story. Okay, so Schreier says, over time, the Mass Effect team went on to overhaul parts of the game and design a number of additional scenes, including a rich, emotional finale that players loved. Yeah, you got this, guys. It's literally coming from Jason Schreier's mouth here. One of the best parts of the game where you can cause people to die in a game that, according to Luke Stevens, is and Skill Up, is almost free of any real conflict and consequences. Okay? The best part of the game was written by the Mass Effect team. Let that sink in, okay? These were not the folks that were struggling with this, since the beginning. They could come in and whip it up. And what were the DA writers doing? What were they doing? What were they doing? Nah. You can't tell me that it was just about being rushed. Somebody was falling apart somewhere. Somebody wasn't able to keep their shit together somewhere. Spill the tea, guys. Come on now. Somebody put their foot down and said, no, I don't want to write that. Just, how did we get this? And so if we look at Skill Up, let's take a look at Skill Up. Skill Up's going to talk about the banality of the writing and how the ending really mattered.
Having played through this game, I can tell you right now that moment is very deceptive because it suggests that this is a game where moments like this are a regular occurrence, and they absolutely are not. I'm not exaggerating when I say that outside of the companion missions, where you can decide how those stories end, and outside of the game's 2-hour finale, where you do make some serious impactful decisions, there were a total of 2 moments in this entire game where I felt like I was making a consequential decision that would actually affect the flow of events.
So if Skill Up is feeling like choices don't matter until the end, that means literally that after spending X amount of years, I think it was over 5 years at least, on the project, albeit probably a chunk of that time was wasted and tossed out, which is, really criminal. But after all that time, the best that they could come up with was 2 early decisions, like early on, and then any other meaningful decisions, the most hard-hitting ones that result in the death of people, spoiler, was from this team that was brought in like 1 year before release or whatever. And they were able to come in and be like, oh yeah, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna have this situation. We're gonna have them all, potentially die if you make your choices wrong, right? So this, of course, all leads me to thinking about the Dragon Age franchise as a whole, my own interactions with it that I shared with you guys at the beginning of this video. And, recall, as I said, I hadn't really played the original Dragon Age Origins beyond a couple hours at the beginning. And as I was rewatching playthrough scenes of Dragon Age Origins and other Dragon Age games, the companion interactions, the sex scenes, and all of that, I came to realize that Dragon Age was always quippy. And although it had adult content, it wasn't half as racy or steamy as Witcher 3. And Dragon Age Origins has a super long sex scene / intimate scene between two men. And I just feel like a lot of people were able to kind of ignore those parts or not think about that stuff because the earlier titles of Dragon Age, even Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age 3, were a bit more dark. The story was more complex and meaningful. The characters had genuine conflict. Probably my favorite character was Anders, who essentially is a terrorist, and I may have married him. And then I am given a choice. What am I going to do with the fact that my husband just committed a very terrible act that killed some bad people and a bunch of innocent people too? And you have a choice. You have 3 choices, in fact. You either kill him, you tell him to leave and never see you again, or you tell him, you know what, you're going to fix this. You're going to help me fix this right now. And because of those choices, if you share your choice with someone else in the real world, there is actual moral discussions that you could have based off of the choices that you made. And this definitely happened with my friends and I, because one of my friends had a very, very, black and white kind of view on the Anders situation, whereas myself and one of my other friends did not. And so this is where I'm saying there's meaningful choice, even in DA2. And all of this complexity, all of this moral uncertainty in a sense, made the story feel really genuine and interesting. And so even though, in my opinion, the writing was always fairly low fantasy, fairly quippy, right? Even though the adult content wasn't as racy and steamy as some people might think it was. This is where we get to thinking about Skill Up's comment about HR in the room. And you can't help but wonder what motivated the writers to go into this space that feels so Disney-fied, that feels so MCU-ish quippy-fied, that feels like it's a romantasy. Let's all be real here. And did they not get any feedback from anyone that was like, hey, this is a little bit too quippy, a little bit too soft, a little bit too, safe. Now, I can understand how this kind of writing came to be apart from being woke, right? You don't need to look far, okay? You just need to look at what's been happening in the publishing world with, the romance novel, the young adult novel, the quippy taglines of Joss Whedon, and, this kind of social focus conflicts that are often found in modern day dramas. And so when Skill Up talks about how the writing is focused on the character word vomiting about their feelings, this sounds familiar. Okay, so here's what Skill Up said.
It speaks to a broader problem, that being a lack of subtlety and wisdom in the writing. This game cannot surface any ideas without just saying them aloud, which leads to this endless stream of exposition-laden personal introspection monologues, like when Harding tells us that she's a bit of a people pleaser.
She hates it.
No, I don't hate it. It's really nice. Temperature.
I won't be upset if you don't like coffee.
He really wouldn't.
I know, but sorry. It's just this thing I do sometimes.
Acting so people will like you?
It sounds terrible when you say it like that. I know I don't need to do it. I just do.
Or here, when Nev opens up about the fact that she really just wants to prove that she can be relied on.
You can't count on a lot here. When I started, I wasn't going to save Minrathus, never mind Thedas. But if I could take a job and follow through, well, maybe people could count on me.
These clips alone aren't enough to convince you of what I'm saying, but I promise you that every emotional exchange has this sort of stuff in it, Rather than letting these sorts of character traits or insecurities surface through action or through the intuition of others, these characters just blurt them out all the time. There's nothing to read into or imagine about these characters because they simply tell you everything about themselves with this point-blank dialogue.
So you might be thinking, oh, that's very weird and strange. Is this a common thing? And the answer is it is in certain special genres, okay? Generally written by 13 to 35-year-old females in the fan fiction world. I've seen it there. I've seen it on Tumblr and DeviantArt. I've seen it in young adult novels, and I've seen it in romances. Yes, even this romance. Asmon's favorite book, Dragon Bride. You see, a lot of these stories are actually deep dives of the human psyche, albeit for a rather singular purpose. Romances, even the weird ones that are quite niche, still involve a lot of emotional exploration, psychological, social, all of these types of explorations in order to allow you to journey with the female and the male characters to those moments of intimacy. And it's quite a journey, by the way. If you think that the word vomiting in Veilguard felt long and unnecessary, how long do you think it takes, for example, for the main female character in The Dragon's Bride to finally consummate her relationship with the Dragon Man? Let's see. Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, it's a lot. Like, granted, my particular Kindle settings are set so that the text is quite large, but it's a good 50 pages. On my Kindle, it's around 85 pages until the first actual sex scene. So you have to understand that when it comes to these kinds of books and these kinds of genres, there's a lot of looking deep within. There's a lot of, internal dialogue. And sometimes those characters may word vomit some of what they're feeling out toward other characters in the world or toward you, the reader. And this isn't a big deal for speed readers who can power through these pages within a few minutes. Personally, if I come to a part where I feel like the character has said the same thing for the 5th time in a row, I'll start just skipping stuff. But I think it really hits hard when you are stuck with it in a video game, that you're being forced to experience it slowly as it's dribbled over time through cutscenes or through long, seemingly unending quest lines. So this brings us back then thinking about all of this, right? Thinking about the issues within the development cycle, thinking about the history of Dragon Age as a whole, thinking about the style of writing and how it doesn't seem to fit. So we now have to circle back around to this question: when is writing bad? When is it woke? And when is it both? And while I think a lot of bad writing happens everywhere to everyone, it feels like Veilguard is a special case. You see, great writers have to shit out a ton of crap before creating a diamond. No one's surprised about that. It's why editors exist. So bad writing isn't limited to a specific political or religious or whatever viewpoint. And just because something is quippy, just because something has modern romantasy sensibilities, doesn't necessarily make it bad for specific audiences and IPs. It's the same thing that I think, or at least that I theorized, was happening in WoW, where we're seeing a bunch of writers who got wound up in their aesthetic and they forgot the customer that they are targeting. Or they thought there were enough customers to target who would buy this product. And obviously there was not. Because when you hijack an IP or when you force an IP into a direction it was not intended, you're going to lose all of the original audience, and there's no telling if you'll gain any additional audience. It's a risk, and it didn't pay off for them. On the other hand, okay, setting aside the abrupt transformation of the Dragon Age franchise and the poor application of these very modern sensibilities in writing, okay, setting all of that aside, if we consider the criticism of wokeness, there's something to be said there as well, unfortunately. Because let's be real, the story was preachy. And it was targeting very real modern discussions today in such an obvious ham-fisted way. It's like, what are you doing? And the character customization reflected modern concerns about beauty and desire and representation in such a ham-fisted way, once again, that it was almost lore-breaking in some ways. There were lots of people who were saying, would you really want to have certain scarring on your body if you were really trying to, let's say, switch your gender expression or what have you? Wouldn't magic be able to ameliorate some of these very physical conditions that can really mentally cause harm to certain people who have to see those and have to remember, oh, I'm not, I wasn't originally what I am today. So all of this to say that some of the stuff that's present in the game feels very ham-fisted and very unhelpful to the whole situation. And the fact that there's no legitimate conflict and consequences in a choice-focused RPG game makes it feel like the writers are protecting certain characters because of what they are. And this is just adding to this whole pile of evidence that makes it feel like this game is really, really woke. And so not only is the writing kind of inappropriate, and even if it was appropriate, poorly done, you have all this ham-fisted messaging that's making it even worse. And then to top this whole crazy cake off with the strangest, but maybe not so strange, but most annoying cherry of all is the woke activist journalist who rushed to defend it, like Jason Schreier, who's not being honest about what are some very real issues with the writing. Now, I don't doubt Jason's ability to dig out a story, but in this case, I feel like there was no real interest in tackling the problems that really brought Veilguard down. Because Veilguard could have been a super gritty live-action game, and it could have failed for many reasons, but it didn't have to fail because of the writing or because of the preachiness. And there are so many ways a game can fail, but the fact that it failed this specific way suggests that there were other factors involved beyond just corporate being corporate. There were certain people somewhere who made very specific decisions to make very specific points, to pursue very specific aesthetic and ideological interests, and it came at the cost of the consumer's enjoyment. Now, I totally understand if you disagree with me, but I feel like Veilguard on both fronts, on the writing front, wasn't great, and on the whole ideological push front wasn't great either. There are ways to share your beliefs and ideas about something. Veilguard was not it. Veilguard is not a good model for that. And there are ways to explore more modern sensibilities in writing, to use quippiness, to pursue a more romantic-y aspect to a story in a world. Veilguard was not it. Veilguard was not it. And as a woman, and as someone who has moved in the fan fiction world, who has also written her own stuff, who has also written for clients, I can tell you that if I went and took a client's outline and I did to it what Veilguard did to the lore and the world and the story of Dragon Age, I would lose that project. I would lose that project to another ghostwriter. And in fact, I have come into situations just like Mass Effect, and I've had to basically come in and do some cleanup work because a ghostwriter couldn't get their heads out of their asses and they couldn't be professional, and they had to start, injecting into the draft their own ideas and their own beliefs about a very specific topic. It's never good. You're going to lose money because you aren't being paid by the client, in this case, video gamers, to, just trample over them and mistreat the original IP. That's not how it works. You're not entitled to our money. You are entitled to your opinion, but not our money. So you got to earn our money. And I think that's where, despite Schreier probably very truthfully pointing at corporate as being one of the factors for why Veilguard failed, it is not the only factor why Veilguard failed. I think there are larger and even more interesting factors to consider, and the fact that he just kind of swept all of that under the rug is very sad and disappointing. But I mean, I guess this is where we're at with the established journalist writers these days. I guess this is all we get. But anyway, thanks to Asmongold and a whole bunch of other people who've spoken out to this in varying degrees of, shall we say, vehemence or whatever. It's very interesting to see the different opinions surrounding Veilguard. But one thing I think we all share is that we're disappointed because we loved this franchise. We loved this world. We loved the characters. And it just feels like it was destroyed. So we're all here post-mortem to look at the death of the franchise. And unfortunately, it appears that the studio has been greatly impacted. So we shall see what the future brings for Dragon Age, if it even has a future at this point. Until then, let me know in the comments down below if there are any other topics you'd like me to cover. Of course, click the bell, subscribe, all that good stuff. And let me know if you want me to cover anything else about writing or, I don't know, Veilguard in the future. Until then, take care.